Houthis' slogan,
Yeah.
Allahu Akbar, death to America, death to Israel, cursed be the Jews, victory to Islam. Is that what they actually want?
Yes.
Or is that just a talking point?
No, that's what they want. When I grew up in Yemen, I would constantly be repeating after the Imam, may Allah destroy Israel, may Allah kill the Zionists, may Allah kill the Jews. I kept being pumped with the propaganda, and I ended up hating Jewish people and hating Zionists and thinking that Israel is the main reason the Middle East is dysfunctional. But then I grew up, I educated myself, talked to people, and I understood that our problems in the Middle East are internal, that it is something that we ourselves have inflicted upon ourselves.
Marhaba and welcome to State of a Nation. I'm Elon Levy. Since October 7th, Israel has come under attack on 7 fronts. From Gaza, the West Bank, Hezbollah in Lebanon, militias in Iraq and Syria, the Islamic Republic of Iran itself, and last but not least, the Houthi pirates in Yemen. And the Houthis are a ruthless and often misunderstood and underestimated enemy. Since the start of the war, they've been firing ballistic missiles at Israel across the Red Sea and attacking international shipping, disrupting major global supply lines. Why? Well, for years they've been preaching their official battle cry. They literally wear their hearts on their sleeve. Allahu Akbar, death to America, death to Israel, a curse upon the Jews, victory to Islam. Nice people. Our guest today is a genuinely nice person, Luai Ahmed, a man who could have been a Houthi, if not for strength of character and a twist of fate. He grew up in the Yemeni capital Sana'a, now the Houthi stronghold, chanting death to Jews in his mosque. He was, by his own admission, an anti-Semite. But as a gay man in a country that publicly executes homosexuals, Luai claimed asylum in Sweden and began a process of de-radicalization that has led him here to Israel, a country he now proudly loves. And today he fights alongside Israeli Friends for Democracy, Human Rights and a Peaceful Future for our region, an activist in the Builders of the Middle East movement on social media. My conversation with Luai weaves through his story of self-discovery to lay out the ugly truth of the Houthi pirate regime and lay out some hope for de-radicalization and peace. Welcome to State of a Nation.
Breaking news out of Israel this morning.
Shocking hostage taking.
Hundreds of Israelis are dead.
I want to bring in Israeli government spokesman.
What happens when the 4-day pause?
How do you resolve this?
Where does this go?
Luai Ahmed, welcome to State of a Nation.
Thank you so much. Happy to be here.
There's a parallel universe in which the Houthi rebels in Yemen might be paying you $100 a month to bomb ships in the Red Sea, but instead you fled Yemen, you live in Sweden, and now we're sitting here in central Tel Aviv recording my podcast. Tell me, what are we doing here? How did this happen?
I have no idea. I really have no idea how I ended up here. It's crazy because I talk about how when I grew up in Yemen and I was in Friday prayers, I would constantly be repeating after the Imam, may Allah destroy Israel, may Allah kill the Zionists, may Allah kill the Jews. And as a child, you don't know how to process these thoughts. And I had no idea that 23 years later, I would be here in Israel, talking to a Zionist and Israelis and actually loving it and humanizing the people who live here. And I think I remember when I was a child thinking to myself, but what if I was them? What if Allah made me a Jew born in Israel? Would it make any sense for him to do that? Because I tried to have this holistic point of view when I was a child, but I kept being pumped with the propaganda, and I ended up hating Jewish people and hating Zionists and thinking that Israel is the main reason the Middle East is dysfunctional. But then I grew up, I educated myself, talked to people, and I understood that our problems in the Middle East are internal, that it is something that we ourselves have inflicted upon ourselves, and it is something that we have to work against and work with. And I think this is the story that I keep repeating, is that the main way that I was able to kind of start humanizing Jewish people was in 2014. I ended up leaving Yemen as a homosexual refugee to Sweden, very long story. But I remember I was a student house in Halmstad in Sweden. And back then I couldn't speak Swedish. I had only been there for a few months. And the Swedes are not very talkative. And there was this new guy in the student house. He had black hair. He looked a bit similar to me. So I walked up to him and was like, hey, where are you from? And he was like, oh, I'm from Israel. And I had a flight or fight mode. every hair in my body just stood up, and I'm quite hairy, so you can imagine I looked like a scared kitten. And I froze. I don't even remember what happened then. I just remember just staring at him and everything just blurring out. And immediately thinking, oh my God, as soon as I tell this guy that I'm a Yemeni Muslim, he's going to want to, kill me, he's going to want to fight, he's going to want to do bad things to me. But then I talked to him like, oh, okay, cool, sure, I live here. And throughout the coming few weeks, I kept expecting him to do bad stuff to me, steal my food from the fridge, tell people around in the student house that I'm a terrorist. And I kept expecting this insane negative relationship with him. But he ended up being my favorite person in the student house. And he was telling me, I'm going to make you Yemeni bread. We have a lot of Yemeni food in Israel. I have a lot of Yemeni friends. And I'm like, what are you trying to do? We're enemies. And that was like the programming that was stuck in my head. But that was also the beginning of me being introduced to Jews and Israelis and realizing, wow, they're incredible people. They're just human beings like us. 5 years later, I'm a journalist in Sweden, and I have Jewish coworkers, and they're the funniest human beings that I've ever met. They made my working experience in Sweden so fruitful and amazing. So that was very emotional for me, actually, because every time I'd go to work and I meet my Jewish workers, and they're my favorite, and I felt so much anger and sadness, thinking I wish that Yemenis went through what I went through and realized that they're just human beings just like us.
And it is desperately sad to think about the way that you were brainwashed like that as a child. It hurts me to hear that, and I'm wondering, is that a typical normal experience in Yemen, or was this one particularly extreme mosque that didn't represent Yemen as a whole?
It's sad to say that that is the experience for the vast majority. So my mother is a feminist human rights activist, and she's the only person that I grew up watching not wearing the hijab in Yemen. And I would go to school and my classmates would be like, your mom is going to hell, your whole family is going to hell, you guys are infidels and Kafirs because you're not real Muslims. And I remember that started kind of like that cognitive dissonance. Wait, my mom is awesome. My mom is the best person I know. She's not going to go to hell. And I think it started there, that started triggering my critical thinking. And sadly, now, being a host for a channel talking about peace, and I support the Israelis and Jewish people, and I see their humanity, and wearing this, bring back the hostages, I'm against terrorism and extremism. I constantly get messages from the people that I grew up telling me, these people are genocidal, these people are devils, why are you supporting them? And it's just, I see through the brainwashing. And I actually don't go into, I tell them, yeah, they're humans, but I actually go into attack mode, kinda. And I tell them, well, 400,000 Yemenis were killed in the past 10 years by the Saudis and the Iranians and the Houthis. Did you say a single word about that? I don't remember you posting anything about it. I don't remember protests talking about that. So when the Arabs and the Iranians are killing us, the Yemenis, the entire world is silent. And now when Israel is going into war with Gaza and they're killing a lot of people, suddenly the Middle East and the world turns upside down. I see through it. And when people tell me, why don't you speak up about the people who are getting killed in Palestine? I'm like, yeah, I actually do. But you ignore when I talk about the Palestinians, and you just focus on your hatred to Israel and Jews. And as a Yemeni, I see through the hypocrisy. I see when they say no Jews, no news. For me, it's like a daily living experience where I saw my country getting bombed and shredded, and more than 10 million Yemeni children are starving. Do you see any protests? No. And I've actually been so fed up in Sweden for the past 10 years saying, why is no one talking about Yemen? Why are there no news articles about Yemen? Whenever there are news articles about Yemen, to me, it's like a celebratory day. And there are so few. But right now, I see how this anti-Semitic brainwashing that has happened in my country to me and to many people is being reflected on what we see on the news. So,
and it is desperately sad to see that anti-Semitic brainwashing, because you say you grew up with a mother who was a women's rights activist, didn't wear a hijab. I think what you could call a relatively progressive space within Yemen. And I mean, this isn't surprising given the brainwashing that is happening in progressive spaces in the Western world. But you're saying that even within what could be described as the most liberal sections of Yemeni society, you're being brainwashed to hate Israel and to hate the Jews. You know, many Israelis will be familiar with Yemen, of course, because of their own personal heritage and connection to Yemen. So many Israelis whose grandparents came from your country. But beyond that, really, we didn't start paying attention to Yemen until it started attacking us. And I remember the early days of the war with Hamas, and Hezbollah starts shooting from Lebanon as well. Suddenly, the Houthi rebels in Yemen declare war on Israel, start firing ballistic missiles towards Eilat, and everyone says, wait, where did this come from? So help us bring our viewers and me as well, because this is a black hole of mine, up to speed. In your lifetime, since 1993, it's like a crash course. Lebanese history. How did we get to this position where the capital of Yemen, Sana'a, is controlled by an Iranian-backed proxy army that has ballistic missiles that it is firing at Israeli cities?
Right, so it goes way back, but let's just go to like 1940s, 50s. We don't need to go back before that.
I was trying to cut the story and say in our lifetime, but you can take it back to the 50s
right.
if you want.
So before, the Yemen is like, we have the majority is Sunnah, and then there's a minority of Shia. So I'm from both. Like, so one part of my family side is Sunni and the other is Shia, and I'm Sushi, usually I say. And so what happened is that when the Shia took over Yemen, or when they were the ruling class, they were authoritarian, they were killing people, they were oppressors. And then they revolted against them, took them down, and the Sunnis took the power back. And when the Sunnis took power, the Houthis and the Shia in Yemen became oppressed.
This is when the Sunnis took power in Yemen?
Yes, exactly, in the 1960s.
60s.
So what happened then is that the Shia and the Houthis were concentrated in a city called Sa'da. It's kind of like our Shia Gaza in Yemen. And Ali Abdullah Saleh was the Yemeni president throughout the 90s and 80s with Saudi Arabia. They started attacking the Houthis. They were bombing them. They were actually killing a lot of people there. And back then, the Houthis were actually an oppressed minority, you could say, because they had, even though they make around 30% of the population, they had no to little political influence.
Sorry, when you say the Houthis, we usually say Houthi to refer to the Iranian proxy army, but
yes.
The Houthis are an ethnic group, a political group? Who are the Houthis?
It's sort of like an ethno-religious group. You
Okay.
could say that. So it's like they're Yemenis, but they belong to the Shia group. So it's like in Yemen, you have it's very complicated for.
So Houthi is not like Hezbollah, the name of an organization. It's an anthropological.
Exactly.
It's a group. Okay.
But it's also turned into a political group. So you have the leadership that made it into a political movement. And so the Houthis were oppressed. They were. And we were like, I remember back before they took over, like we would report on the crimes that happened against the Houthis, the countries against them. So in 2011, the revolution happened, the Arab revolution, the Arab Spring. And, you know, I remember like as a 16-year-old, I would go out on the streets, me and my feminist and liberal progressive friends carrying like equality, human rights and stuff. And
death to the Jews.
No, that was not a part of the agenda to us. And then you had the Houthis who were carrying the death to the Jews, death to Israel, and all of that. And then you also have the Muslim Brotherhood. You had all these different parts of the Yemeni society. Like we, the liberal progressives, were like a tiny minority, but we had our tent. So the Houthis were protesting, and I remember thinking, wow, this is great. Like everybody's going to have like we need democracy. And we need like to reform the society, but we need to first bring down the dictator. And we were all united in that. So we failed miserably. There was a national dialogue that my mother was a part of, and you know, dialogue and democracy in the Middle East is so hard to achieve. So what happened then when the Houthis found out in 2013 and 2014 that they were not going to get any political representation, they were actually getting political influence and representation, but they wanted so much more because they're fascists. And when they were not able to achieve that, they just grabbed their weapons, left Sa'da, and started taking over the country. And it's actually very simple and basic the way they did it. They just carried their weapons and started going to like the ministries and the governmental institutions, pointing their weapons at the guards. Like it's basically like that, going into the institutions and just like threatening everybody, kicked everybody out, and that's how they took over the nation. And that's when Saudi Arabia and the rest of the world really, or like the West and the Arab countries started bombing them and fighting them. And since then, since they've taken over the north, they tried to take over the south, but they couldn't. But since they took over and all the war has been going, more than 400,000 Yemenis have been killed.
400,000.
400,000. So like that's 40,000 every year, and I think it's underreported as well because Yemen has like a very broken infrastructure.
These are war deaths. These are deaths by starvation. How do these people get
These
killed?
are both, yeah. But right now, more than 10%. 10 million children are starving. So when I grew up around 50...
Yes, maybe the Houthis should stop trying to bomb the ships carrying food through the Red Sea. There's a thought.
They're not helping themselves. So right now, I actually get messages and they're saying, oh, now the US and the UK are bombing your country. Are you happy about that? I'm like, are you blaming me? You should blame the Houthis because they're the ones who started it. Like, think about it. If the Houthis are not attacking Israel and actually trying to feed their own people, trying to help their own state and building, then we would not be in this situation. You cannot, like, stab someone and be angry that there's, repercussions that happen afterward. And that's a problem. There's no thought of consequences. There's so much anger. And if you act just upon anger, you're not really doing yourself a favor.
The Houthis' slogan is Allahu Akbar, death to America, death to Israel, cursed be the Jews, victory to Islam.
Yep.
Is that what they actually want?
Yes.
Or is that just a talking point?
No, that's what they want. I remember like growing up in Sana'a, I would see the logo everywhere. And it's kind of like, oh, of course, curse upon the Jews. I mean, they're the worst. And it really penetrates your brain. And I usually say this, if you wish destruction upon other people just for the sake of destroying them, you are destroying yourself. And people don't realize this that much. And what saddens me the most is that even the intelligentsia and the academics and the people who are intelligent and smart in Yemen, they also fall into that. And I usually say it's like my personal experience of meeting Jews and coming to Israel and meeting Zionists and like understanding what Zionism is made me humanize and sympathize with the Jews and Israelis. And it also, like, when I think about this, it actually makes me depressed, is that the fact that when it comes to the Holocaust, we're told nothing about it. Like, there's nothing about the Holocaust. And if it's mentioned, if it's something that's brought up, which you rarely ever hear about, the consensus is, of course, it never happened. It's Jewish propaganda. But we wish it did happen. And it was only when I came to Sweden, and it took so many years of hearing about it, hearing people talk about it, hearing Jews talk about it, going to conferences, going to the Jewish community in Sweden. Actually, the more that I learned about it, the more that I felt like my soul was hollow, because it's like I get so sad at the child that it was me and how much hatred there is to just like, it's like the worst thing that you could ever imagine happening to people.
I'm struggling to understand this cognitive dissonance. You have this militia group chanting, death to the Jews, death to the Jews, death to Israel. And then when the Jews come along and say, well, in which case we need a safe haven of our own with an army to protect us, they say death to Zionism. I mean, do they not understand if you're chanting death to the Jews are going to demand a safe home for themselves?
Yeah, I mean, but they shouldn't have a safe home for themselves and they shouldn't exist. That's the main narrative.
And is the narrative in Yemen that the Jews should go back to where they came from and, back to Yemen as well?
Yeah, so like that's also something that like my own family tells me, no, they have to go back to where they came from. They're Zionists, they took our country. I'm like, if you actually read, if you educate yourself, they did not take over our country, they took back their country. But when they say they have to go back, and I just tell them, okay, go back where? There's almost 500,000 Yemeni Jews in Israel. Should they go back to Yemen, where there's only one Yemeni Jew left who's getting tortured to death? So you're basically calling for genocide for the Yemeni Jews to go back to where they came from. Same thing with the Moroccan Jews.
I mean, that's what, death to the Jews means.
Exactly. And there's this kind of like insane cognitive dissonance with how they argue and contradict themselves. It's like when you, like, at the end of the day, and every like road leads to the fact that the Jews should not exist. And to me, my family says, we're not anti-Jew, we're anti-Zionists. And I'm like, that's kind of the same thing if you actually understand that Jews throughout history in our country. We have been killing Jews. We have been persecuting them. We had like a village. We have a village in Yemen called the Jewish village, and they burnt it. They were killing Jews. They were kidnapping their children as well. You know, they talk about how like Israel is kidnapping Yemeni children. Muslims were kidnapping the Jewish children and converting them.
This refers to the allegations that back in the 50s there were many of the Yemeni Jewish immigrants, and some of the children went missing in the transit camps and were later declared to be dead.
Right, and there's a hate, but you know, honestly, there's a lot of like anti-Semitism and hatred towards Jews, but I do think that what it comes down to is that we are not fed love and empathy and proper ethics.
And that brings us to a point that the Houthi rebels are firing ballistic missiles at Israel. Why? Why are the Houthi in Yemen attacking Israel? What have we done against them? How do we make them stop?
So how do we make them stop? No idea. Like, I don't think anybody really
literally,
knows.
what do they want from us? No, I'm asking you this because I remember listening to a New York Times podcast a while ago in which the presenter asked the journalist, why are the Houthis attacking Israel? She says, well, the slogan says death to Israel and, death to Israel and cursed be the Jews. But really, the Houthis are trying to distract from their failures to provide sanitation and health services in Yemen. So I'm trying to understand why are they shooting ballistic missiles at us?
Exactly. They failed. In Yemen, like, what they promised...
Is that it? Is it just because they want to kill the Jews, or are they trying to distract attention from their own failures of government? What is behind this?
I mean, like, you can see it throughout the history of the recent history of the Middle East. So like with Saddam Hussein and Gaddafi, it's always like whenever you fail, whenever you are dysfunctional, you're like, look, they're the enemy. They're the reason that we're dysfunctional. It's not us. It's the Jews. They control the media. They control our resources. They're killing our people. And they don't forget the enemy, guys. So it's a scapegoat. It's a perfect scapegoat. And it works as a perfect scapegoat because we are programmed since we're children to hate the Jews. So like the two things that the two biggest insults in Yemen are Yahudi, Jew, and makhnouth, homosexual or faggot. So you and I. And so when you soak people's minds with so much hatred towards Jews, it becomes like a natural instinct that, oh, right, of course they are the issue. Okay, maybe Saddam Hussein and the Houthis are not able to fix our problems. They're not able to, feed the children. They're not able to build an infrastructure, but they're actually fighting the real devils. And I think what we're forgetting in this discourse, and as someone who's grown up in this culture, is we forget that. So I am a Muslim, and I identify as a cultural Muslim. So like I celebrate everything that we do as Muslims, and I love my Muslim community. Even like in most Muslim countries, I would get killed. I don't have hatred towards my people. I want them. They're like my classmates or my brothers. I want us to do better. It's not like I want to beat them. I want them to do better. But I'm not religiously Muslim. So like the more science that I read, the more that I lost my faith in the book. Like, so I don't believe that the Quran is is what should be the law. I believe it should be like a metaphorical book that inspires us to do better. We should pick the good things that pass into the era we live in. And there are some great hadith. There's a hadith, for example, that says, never teach your children what you were taught. Well, and I think if we take that, just that, and follow it in the Middle East and in Muslim countries, we would have the most progressive and amazing societies. But what happens is you have the imams in mosques and schools who want power and use the Quran to brainwash people. So I think we forget that when I was at that state, when I believed in heaven and hell and right and wrong. So one of the things is that as a homosexual, I couldn't act upon being a homosexual. So like there was this American guy that came to Yemen, and we were at a party, and he's like, I was walking in the hallway, and he like came to me, and he knew that I was gay, like it's so obvious, but he tried to like kiss me. He kissed me in the neck, and he was trying to, and I was frozen, and I thought, oh my God, I'm gonna go to hell. That's one. And second of all, if anybody sees us, nobody could see us. So I kept like looking around. Nobody could see us because we were in a hall. But if anybody finds out, I'm gonna go to jail. I'm going to be killed by the death penalty. So what the main discourse that was happening in my brain when I believed firmly in the Quran was there's heaven and hell, and those are the cornerstones of existence. So in the minds of many Muslims who get firmly brainwashed into believing in heaven and hell, when you believe that there are good things you do and there are bad things you do, and you could either end up in hell or heaven, and then we have one enemy. So that kind of like sits in your mind as a criteria of what you should do and not do. So like, you know, in Islam you have like the angels and the devils, and the Jews are the devils. So like no matter what you do, like as long as you fight the Jews, as long as you kill the Jews, because it is religious, there's a lot of politics, but there's also a lot of religion. So when I hated the Jews, it was not just about Palestine. It was not just about Gaza. It was a firm belief that the Jews are evil people that try to kill Prophet Muhammad, that there's even like a conquest that we learn about where Prophet Muhammad ordered the slaughtering of an entire Jewish village.
This is Khaybar?
Yeah.
And this is the chant we hear so often on streets in the West, Khaybar, Khaybar al-Yahud, which is a war cry, right?
Exactly. When that happened in Sweden, actually, they were going on the street and they were yelling Khaybar, Khaybar, Sofia Ard, and like the Swedish discourse was, oh, there's just, you know, fighting for Palestine and stuff.
They mean jihad in the nice way.
Exactly. But I translated the video actually to Swedish, and I actually you don't know what they're talking about. And when I did that, the video went, but this was a long time ago, the video went viral and people started understanding, but there were no news articles talking about it. Because in Sweden, there's this insane fear of being called racist, or an insane fear of actually exposing what is happening on Swedish streets. So to me, it's like what's happening in Sweden right now is also a demonstration of how Western politicians have no idea what they're talking about. And when they start realizing that there's a major conflict going on that they're not able to solve, they just be quiet and talk about the oppressed instead of actually talking about both sides and what's going on there.
This must drive you crazy. I mean, in the context of these chants we hear on the streets of the West, where you say people in the West have no idea what they are chanting when they say Khaybar, Khaybar al-Yahud, or globalize the Intifada, or from the river to the sea.
Right.
One of the latest catchy slogans is Yemen, Yemen, make us proud.
Oh, God.
Tell me about that.
I actually made a video about that when they first started chanting that. And I said, make us proud. Like 10 million children are starving. 400,000 Yemenis were killed. How? And this is because of the Houthis, because the Houthis are destroying Yemen. So what makes you proud of them is the fact that they're trying to kill Jewish people. So is that like, so if you have like war criminals who are trying to kill Jews, does that make you proud that they, you know, they're doing something good, which is killing the Jews?
But that word pride, make you proud, must really rub you up the wrong way, knowing you had to flee Yemen, claim refugee status in Sweden as a homosexual. That was the reason for being able to claim refugee status.
Yeah.
People saying proud when there is the death penalty. I mean, I understand they actually execute gay people in Yemen.
Yes.
Tell me more about how that works.
So it's like, it's not, when I talk about like growing up and being fed anti-Semitism, and I think it's also one of the reasons, because people, like many of my comment sections, majority of my comment sections say, oh, you just support Israel because you're gay. And actually, I think there is a truth to that. It's not because I can live as a free homosexual in Israel. You know, I live in Sweden, and Sweden is the most pro-LGBTQ country in the world. But being a homosexual helped me view and observe society from like a third perspective. So when I was 12 and I was in class, and I was just like looking at my Quran teacher, who's super hot, by the way, and I was like, wow, like what? I didn't know back then that I was gay. But then, like, just learning and stuff, and one day we're learning about the penalties. You get killed for killing people, according to Sharia. So if you kill someone without a reason, if there's a reason, then it's fine. You get away with it. But if you kill someone without a Sharia-approved reason, you get killed. I'm like, well, that makes sense. If you kill someone, why would I sympathize with you, right? And
sorry, when you say Sharia, do you mean according to the theoretical religious text, or this is the law of the land in Houthi Yemen?
Yes, the law of the land that is followed, that is applied by the Houthis, but also by the prior government. So we always have Sharia, no matter who's ruling. And I remember sitting in class, just hearing my teacher telling us about the death penalties, and suddenly he starts saying homosexuals. I'm like, what is that? He's like, so homosexuals get a death penalty, and homosexuality is if a man lays with another man. And at that moment, I realized, like, imagine being a child and sitting there and hearing that you should be killed. And the children are like raising their hands. They're like, but do they go to hell after they get killed? And I was like, yeah, of course they're going to go to hell. So I was like, there is no way out for me. Like I am.
You knew back then at the age of 12 already?
Yes. And I remember thinking, wow, like, does God not understand me? Like, what is wrong with does God not know that he created me? And that also ties to the, you know, like, what if I were a Jew? So there was...
Sorry, is that common for gay people to be executed in Yemen? Is that a rare occurrence? The government actively persecutes?
It's not rare. It happens all the time. I constantly heard about there's shootings, they're going to shoot people on the square, so they lie them down on the floor and they shoot them. No one reports about that, but you hear about it all the time.
Sorry, are those the official executions?
That's the official, that's the government, and the Houthis are doing it now as well. They're just carrying on. So
they tie them up in the public square and they shoot them.
They cover their faces, put them on the floor, and they shoot them on the floor. And the thing is, it's like what they say, many times they say pedophiles. These people are pedophiles. They don't say gays. But if you're gay, you're a pedophile. It's kind of like the far right in Europe as well. Like homosexuals
Horrific.
are pedophiles, yeah. And so that made me kind of like hide in my closet and just be in this eternal mental cage until like I was invited to go to Sweden in 2014 to speak about human rights. And I remember in that moment thinking, oh my God, I can actually be myself. I can actually come out even to myself, because even though I knew I was gay, I was in denial. I was too scared to even admit it to myself. And then I moved to Sweden and I actually started talking about these issues, talking about homophobia, and because it was so crazy. I was in this TV debate in Sweden, and I'll never forget this. I'm standing in front of this Hungarian Swedish woman. She was Jewish. And she belongs to the Center Party. And I was standing there and I was talking about the, like, when you bring a lot of people into Sweden from these cultures, you have to have extremely active plans to kind of change the mentalities, change the brainwashing that they go through and stuff like that. And I literally said this, like, in my country, I would have gotten killed for being gay, you know? There's homophobia in the West, but it's not the same kind of homophobia. It's like completely different universes of homophobia. And she straight up looks me in the face and says, yeah, Luai, that's true. There's homophobia there, but we have a lot of homophobia here as well. In Poland, for example, they are the most homophobic country where they're not allowing for, there are areas where they're banning the pride flag. There are, you know, they're not very hospitable towards gay people. They don't want gay people to get married. And I was just looking at her like, are you freaking kidding me? Like, I had the same moment as you. That is astounding, you know? I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, we're not talking about the same thing, you know? And I think that is something that I've been trying to like educate in Sweden. Like,
and you've been trying to educate also with some terrific social media content. We have one of your videos here talking about the persecution of homosexuals in Yemen. If we can just watch this now.
Last month, in my country, Yemen, the Houthi militia killed 13 homosexuals. And this month, they're planning to kill 35 more. And no one is talking about this. The penalty for homosexuality is execution. And it's the same penalty in 11 other countries in the Middle East. Which is crazy. How can you kill somebody for being different? This is part of the reason why I left Yemen.
Really horrific what is going on there. And I'm wondering, you know, this hatred of Israel extends in progressive spaces as well, and it drives us crazy that liberals in the West don't see that Israel is their obvious ally.
Right.
In many ways, Israel is the gay man of the Middle East, right? It's the minority. Everyone says this is not normal, and everyone knows, you know, having a Jewish state in the Middle East is the most natural thing possible, right?
Right.
But why is it, given that the Yemen, Hamas, or everywhere else in the Middle East, so oppressive towards gay people, that you have this hostility within Western progressive queer spaces as well, where it seems normal to take a regime that I didn't know this blindfolds and shoots homosexuals in the street and chants Yemen, make us proud, and that sounds normal to them.
Mm-hmm. I do think that after a very long time of extreme leftist Marxist brainwashing, because, you know, we're not the only ones who are getting brainwashed in Yemen and in the Middle East. You have a lot of extensive brainwashing that happens in the West. And I think, like, to summarize it, I think, like, the main issue, which one of my favorite writers, Aron Flam, talks about a lot, is he says that in the West, there's only two lenses. There's, like, oppressor and oppressed. And you fall into these categories depending on what color you are, and, you know, there are a lot of dimensions there. But in the case of Israel, Israel is the oppressor and Palestine is the oppressed. And therefore, no criticism towards Palestine. It's like it becomes this holy angel because they're oppressed, and Israel,
And
because
that makes us the devils.
per definition. And because Israelis are the oppressors, we just have to condemn them. They're the ones with the power. They're the ones with the military. They're the bad people. And I think within that, it's not just the Israel and Palestine conflict. It's also like you see it with in America with black against white, right? Like if you're white, you're an oppressor. If you're black, then you're oppressed, period, right? Doesn't matter if you're like a billionaire black person and you're like a poor white person who lives on like a homeless white person. It does not matter. If you're white, you're oppressor. If you're black, you're oppressed. And I think that colors a lot of the discourse because they only see. And another also issue that really infuriates me more than anything, and I keep saying it like every 5 minutes whenever I have these discussions, is that they view Israel as a white colonial country and a white country, and the Palestinians as people of color. And that also colors their mentality that the white people are the oppressors and the colonizers, and the brown people are the colonized people. So they're not able to actually go into the details and actually see what's happening. What is Israel doing and why are they doing that?
Yes, a white settler country with all the hundreds of thousands of Jews of Yemeni descent who are supposed to go back to where they came from, where they would be murdered because people are chanting death for the Jews.
Exactly, but I would also say that so with the work that we do with Builders of the Middle East is we're trying to fight, we're not trying, we are fighting against extremism, and we're trying to humanize people on the Palestinian side and on the Israeli side.
And I'm glad you mentioned this now. We have a clip, actually. I want to try to understand what this project is, Builders of the Middle East, because I'm quite intrigued.
Are we pro-Palestine or pro-Israel?
Which side are we on?
On our page, you might see content like this.
Criticizing violent Israeli settlers.
Or explaining how Israel became a safe home for Jews.
And you might be wondering, which side are we on? Israel's? Palestine's?
Actually, we are on the third side.
What is the third side in this conflict?
The third side, the sushi side. I think the third.
That's the side I can sign on to.
Yeah, awesome. Because I don't believe that this binary.
Look, when you brand it like that as the sushi side, who can say no, right? Like it wouldn't be a Jewish function without sushi, right?
Right, exactly. Well, so here's the thing. A guy came up to me the other day, a Norwegian Israeli, and he was telling me, Luai, why are you're so smart? Why are you like doing stuff with Builders of the Middle East? It's a far left organization. I'm like, wait, what makes them far left? And then he said, well, they're asking for peace. I'm like, wait, hold on. What did you just say? And then to me, that is so infuriating because we at the Builders of the Middle East, we're right-wing, left-wing, centrist, Palestinians, Israelis, Arabs. We're from the entire spectrum, and we only have one mission: fight extremism and humanize human beings. We tell stories of people in Gaza who are doing amazing stuff. We're telling people of Palestinians who are trying to bring people together, trying to humanize Israelis. We're telling stories of Israelis who are humanizing Palestinians. We're really working as an abridging force that humanizes people, because when you scroll through social media, you're always left with this bad taste in your mouth and your soul, where you think social media has turned into like this hollow, dark force where everything you see just makes you feel like crap. And beyond that, it does not contribute to peace building, right? So Builders of the Middle East we are doing incredible work in trying to humanize, trying to educate, explain, because it upsets me actually because like I say, I'm pro-Israel and I'm pro-Palestine. And when I say that, like I get people from both sides saying, no, you're genocidal, right? And I'm like, so do you guys not realize that Israelis are actually human beings of flesh and blood, and Palestinians are also of flesh and blood? So in my experience, like I cannot go and say Israelis humanize Palestinians and stuff like that. For me, as an Arab who grew up in the Arab culture and the Muslim culture, and I was personally affected by this brainwashing that really rotted my soul, I take it more upon me to say, no, this is not working. I speak to my own people and say, we need to change our thought processes. We need to become more humane and understand that the Jewish people are our brothers and sisters.
And this really intrigues me about you, because you've gone through this process of de-radicalization.
Right.
One of the things that Israel has been talking about during this horrible war with Gaza is that if we want peace, if we want a genuine path towards peace, we need to see de-radicalization within Palestinian society and within Gaza, and people who are taught the same slogans of death to the Jews and Israel is the devil need to be weaned off that radical ideology, see us as human beings, and when they see us as human beings, we'll have peace. Do you think it's possible to have de-radicalization in Gaza and the Palestinian Authority? Where do you even begin with that task of weaning people off a violent, hateful, and I would say genocidal ideology?
Absolutely. Of course you can de-radicalize. I think people who say like, oh, you can't de-radicalize them, they're monsters. It's like you've reached a point of dehumanization where you cannot see the world as it is.
Oh, no, I'm not saying they're sort of essentially, substantially
I'm not
unable to be honest. Like,
no.
How do we do it?
Okay.
How is it done?
Look at the UAE. In the UAE, I actually heard this thing that kind of like blew my mind, which is in the UAE, the government actually monitors the mosques. They hand out scripts to the imams. This is what you say. And if you dare say something that, preaches hatred or violence or any of that sort, you're put in jail. You're committing a crime against the state. What this tells me is that with proper governance, you can actually transform a society from the bottom up.
But that means that in Gaza, it's going to require a change of regime. Essentially, it's not possible to de-radicalize Gaza while Hamas is still the government.
Well, of course, I believe actually that the UAE and Arab countries have the responsibility to take part of the change and the de-radicalization of the mosques and schools. I actually worked in 2019, I was translating books because, Sweden is sending a lot of money to Palestine. And I helped translate...
A lot of it going to UNRWA, the refugee agency whose schools are responsible for so much of this radicalization, and we're saying is going to have to be dismantled or shifted out of education in Gaza altogether if we're going to see genuine de-radicalization.
Right, because the schools that Sweden are financing, because, Swedes take pride in it, saying, yeah, we're helping the oppressed, very Swedish. Now, when I started translating the books for my Swedish, there was a Swedish organization that I was translating the books that Sweden...
What books are you translating?
School books. Okay. In Gaza that Sweden is financing. So I started translating the books, and most of it was about rockets, jihad, intifada, anti-Semitism, our enemies.
Dear God.
And I'm like, I am paying for this. Sweden is radicalizing or helping radicalize.
You're paying for it, we're paying the price for it.
Exactly. And to me, it's like, what are you doing? What we're supposed to be doing is fighting extremism, not feeding extremism. And which is so upsetting to me, because Sweden, they think that they're the most humanizing part of the world, where they believe in supporting the oppressed and the underdog always is on the right side. And I think, like, as someone who has been through that, I don't look at Palestinians and say monsters. The exact opposite. I look at Palestinians as my brothers and sisters and think, I was there. I was brainwashed into hating the Jews, and it's not their fault. It's not my fault that I hated Jews and Zionists. You can't blame me for having been an anti-Semite. I'm not the one who built these schools. I'm not the one who put these books and mosques in place to make me an anti-Semite.
No, you're not responsible for the fact you're anti-Semite. Sweden.
You got a point.
Well, those funding the education, the European nations that think they're doing good by funding education systems that are teaching vicious anti-Semitism and hatred of Israel, yes, they absolutely bear responsibility for the fact that people get churned out the other side of this education system as raging anti-Semites.
Yeah, exactly. And we have to understand that the system itself is rigged and corrupt and dark, and we have to change that. And it really upsets me, actually, that I rarely ever hear people talk about how we need to focus on the mosques and the schools to change them, because that's where we start. It's the children.
In Europe as well.
Oh my God, we cannot even begin in Europe, because Europe, I do think that Europe has a much harder task after Israel, because I think look at the UAE, for example. The UAE's foreign minister said that the radicals and the fascists and the most extremist terrorists are going to be in Europe and not in the Middle East in the future. And I actually agree. I saw it when I arrived to the refugee camp, and I think that this reflects upon what kind of problem we have in Sweden. I realized, I thought I was leaving the closet and arriving to being, myself and being gay and whatever. And I realized that I arrived to a refugee camp that was pretty much ISIS, where people were celebrating Charlie Hebdo attacks.
In Sweden?
In Sweden, in Halmstad, in Tylösand. And I remember like my roommate was actually liberal. He's like, what the hell is wrong with these people? Are they crazy? Why are they here? I'm like, I know, beats me. And the funny thing is that this guy who was like my liberal friend eventually got radicalized in Sweden, because you enter this society where learning Swedish is mission impossible. Swedish is a very complicated language. And you don't feel like Swedes are very, like, I love Swedish people. I learned to adapt. In the beginning, I thought they were all racist. But when I learned Swedish and I became Swedish, and now I am racist. No, not really. But I became
Now you're a white oppressor.
Now I'm a white adjacent oppressor. But the thing is, like, I became very Swedish, which means like I don't talk to people. I don't look people in the eye on the street. I just keep to myself, which I love now. In the beginning, I thought it was racism. But when you...
Sorry, what you thought was racism was the fact that people wouldn't make eye contact with you on the bus.
Exactly. Oh, actually, this is very serious, because like in Yemen, when you're walking in the street, in the Middle East, people look at each other, they talk to each other and stuff. You arrive to this country where no one looks at you, no one acknowledges your existence.
But that's the way people show respect, by respecting your personal space.
But that's not how I saw it. I saw it as racism. And it did not click to me that they're actually racist towards each other. They don't talk to each other, they don't look at each other. But to me, it's like, in my experience, I went from this culture where everybody's so harmonious and talks to each other, to these white people who are just think that I'm like a Pokemon that they want to interact with. But eventually I became one of them, and I became like them, and I love that culture so much because I assimilated, didn't even integrate, and I perfected Swedish. And I actually write about learning Swedish and mastering Swedish, how it was able to help me love Sweden, become Swedish, find every job opportunity that I ever wanted, work in a newspaper that I love so much. So like, if you really want to, if you give it your all. But back to the guy. So the guy...
We're going back to the refugee camp.
The refugee camp.
And your liberal friend in the ISIS refugee camp
Yes.
ISIS-adjacent refugee camp in
Yes,
Sweden.
Exactly. And he ended up becoming radicalized and hating Europe, thinking it's a colonial, like, you know, it's a white project. Like, they started even talking about how Sweden colonized the Samis. It's like, there's such a strong anti-white, anti-West sentiment in social media that is really... Among everybody, really. Like, even in the Swedish educational system, where they teach critical race theory. Critical race theory is like a thing in the US. In Sweden, it's kind of like the bedrock of education. If you're white, you're oppressor. If you're not white. Like, Sweden is a very extreme case. It's
such an unhealthy way for a country to treat its own self-identity. I mean, it's okay to be self-critical, but it sounds like it's almost indulging in...
Which is hilarious to me.
Self-hatred.
Because many, like, my Swedish critics tell me that I'm self-hating. And I'm like... Actually, I love myself. I love my people. I love everything. I just want to change our society in the way we are. And you're not one to talk about oikophobia, because like what you're doing to your country, there's no way you love your country if you're watching how it's transitioning. Sweden went to being one of the safest countries in the world to today being one of the most dangerous, I think now, country in Europe.
Well, just look at what happened in Eurovision. Israel put out a travel warning telling Israelis, don't go to Sweden unless you have to. There's a chance that the anti-Israel protests are going to be used as a cover for attacks on Israeli tourists. And poor Eden Golan wasn't allowed to leave her hotel room because there were mobs outside paying for her blood.
It's actually way worse than that. Like, I visited the Jewish community in Malmö in 2018 or 2019. And I wanted to cry right there and then, because they were telling me like there are no Jews left here. Actually, we all left, and I'm like, how is this not being reported? By the way, in 2018 and 2019, if you spoke about this, which I did, I didn't care, and you're called racist, you're called an anti-Semite, you're called a fascist, you're called a Nazi. If you even speak about the fact that Jews in Malmö are fleeing away because of migration from Middle Eastern countries, you actually call out the reason, because that is the reason. You're called a fascist, you're called a racist. Today, we have, it's so crazy to me, because today we have like the prime minister and all the ministers talking publicly about it. But if you go back 4 or 5 years, like people who spoke out against this were called the worst kind of things. Because I'm homosexual, I'm a refugee, I'm brown, I have all of these cards that I just use. You can't call me racist, you can't call me homophobic, you can't call me. But still, there were people who used to call me that because it made people very upset. And I think that, I love Daniel Ryan, who talks that he's like, we're trying to preserve Western civilization. I actually don't think that Israel is a part of Western civilization. Let me tell you why. Because when I arrived here in November...
Now I feel othered.
So no, when I arrived here in November, actually, I remember like instantaneously thinking, wow, like Israel has the soul of the Middle East and the heart of the West. It combines them in the most beautiful way. You have like this warmth and harmony of the Middle East that is lacking.
We look each other in the eye.
Exactly. You look each other in the eye, and people are so kind and nice. Like whenever like I travel around Europe, I am scared, especially the way I look. I freak out, not freak out, but like I have an anxiety about going up to people and asking them stuff. In Israel, when I go up and talk to people, I feel like they're my brothers and sisters. They're so warm, they're so helpful, and I have never felt that way since leaving Yemen. You know, like just kind of like warmth and love.
We have the best of the Middle East. We make eye contact. We have the best of Europe because we have IKEA as well. I want to ask you
democracy and human rights and
yes, and all of that, and also IKEA. One thing I have to ask. I mean, this conversation we could go on forever. It's really fascinating, and we'll have to pick this up another time. One thing about the Houthis I don't understand, and I'll have to explain.
Yeah.
How is it that the Houthis make the most fabulous music videos? We have a clip here that I saw at the beginning of the war, and the production value that the Houthis have invested in making their propaganda videos is outstanding. And if they took 1/10 of the investment and talent that they put into music videos about killing the Jews and invested it in Broadway and musical theater, I think Yemen has a way out of its economic trap. Let's have a watch of this Houthi music video. For those who are following on the audio, we have the subtitles here, which we can help you follow along. We will expel the invader and its darkness. O Quds, the heart of guidance and light. O Quds, the free people and revolution's destination. We swear by the Al-Waqia and Tur surahs, and they've got these labels with the death to Jews, victory to Islam on their sleeves. We'll expel the invader and its darkness. And it goes on with this very, very catchy tune that for weeks I had stuck in my head as a new favorite tune for Lechadodi in Kabbalah Shabbat on Friday nights. And I think we should start singing it, the Yemeni version. No, seriously, I joke around, but this was a video that came out at the beginning of the war.
Right.
Israel's still trying to expel Hamas terrorists who invaded on October 7th. Yemen has started shooting ballistic missiles at Israel. And this is what they're spending their time on, creating these high-production music videos. What is going on here?
Well, they have a knack for music, I guess, but I think it shows you like their priorities. And actually what you were saying about, I don't remember who exactly said that they're trying to deflect from the fact that they're such fascist failures and terrorists, that they're trying to show that they're actually fighting the evil and they're doing the Middle East a favor and they're the actual real heroes. And it's so funny because in Yemen, even the people who are critical towards the Houthis and thought they were fascists suddenly thought, wow, they are making us proud. They're putting Yemen on the map for, you know, wanting to kill the Jews and the Israelis. And I think like this production is pretty much the product of one of the key components to why they are what they are and how successful they are, which is the Islamic Republic of Iran, which is the terrorist organization. I don't think it's a state. It's a terror organization that is really dismantling the Middle East, and they're trying to, to take over the Middle East. And one of the best ways to do it is through proxies, because if you go into war directly, then you're actually not that smart. But if you use proxies like your Shia puppets in Yemen, who would do anything for money because it's the poorest country in the Middle East with like a starving population. They're flooding them with money. And that's one of the things that where the Yemeni society was against with the Shia and Houthis, is that they're getting money from like the Islamic Republic of Iran, and we don't want that. We don't want like influence from these Shia people who want to destroy our country. but they are getting financed, weapons, money, power, media from the Islamic Republic of Iran. So this is not really Yemeni production. It's an Iranian production or Islamic Republic of Iran production.
Well, there we go. One day in a free Iran, hopefully the Iranian people can put their skills to use in developing musical theatre and using that to develop the Iranian economy. Luai Ahmed, this has been a really fascinating discussion. I wish we could go on and on. How can people follow you and Builders of the Middle East on social media?
Yes, so you can look at the Builders of the Middle East on TikTok and Twitter and Instagram, and my name is Luai Ahmed, so you can just follow me on Instagram.
Can you spell that how, for those who are now searching on their phones?
Yeah, it's Luai, and then Ahmed is Ahmed. Okay. And yeah, and I make a lot of thoughtful content about what my perspective is, how we think we should de-radicalize, and I try to speak to the people who are against me as a homosexual and against freedom and democracy and human rights in the Middle East and in the West.
Thank you. This has been a fascinating discussion. Thank you for your openness and courage and frankness, really. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
And that brings us to the end of today's episode of State of a Nation with Luai Ahmed. As always, if you enjoy it, please follow us and subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe on all the social media platforms, and we'll be back soon with more episodes that take us beyond the headlines and between the lines. I'm Elon Levy, and thanks for joining us.